here's another video in OCPP series. I'm Christian and I'm working for Full Stack Energy, and in this video we will be talking about start transaction method. So we talked about different methods before. If you haven't seen that videos, they're available on that channel. What we will do in this video is we'll start a transaction. So as always, we need to connect to our central system. We're using Charge Complete here in this example, and that's being connected. We can send boot notification, status notification of our charging station. At the moment we have selected one connector 1. So basically what we do is we will authorize. So I can do that in the order. So I will set boot notification that's being accepted here, and I will send status notification this is available, and now my station is available in the central system. So I could go here and I can see it is connected and available. So what I have here is RFID tag. That means this is a unique identifier that it is registered in our central system, and the central system know what kind of user that is. So whenever I start a transaction, I need to use the same RFID as I authorize. So authorize is basically the way to check if the user is existing and if that will be authorized. But Start transaction also require that. So let's create a new transaction and see what's actually involved in that method. So start transaction here, and you can see here we have start transaction. So we are passing few things. ID tag, this is the same as we used for authorize. So we need to tell the central system which vehicle, which user actually start that transaction. Then we have a connector ID. Then this is 1. So basically that's what we have here. So we have connector ID 1 or 2. And then we also have meter start, and I will be talking about that in a second. So we have meter start 0, and then we have current timestamp. That's very important values here that we are passing. But for a moment, let's take a look at the documentation. So if we go to OCPP 1.6 edition 2, if you go here, we have start transaction. So this will explain what the start transaction is. So basically we are sending request and we're going back confirmation. So this is what we did. We send a connector ID, ID tag, meter start, timestamp, and the reservation ID is optional. So let's click on start transaction request. This is something that we have sent, and this is basically an explanation of this method. So connector ID, you need to tell which connector we use. You might have multiple connectors per charging station, so we need to specify which connector is actually starting the transaction. RFID, we talk about this, so it is crucial to provide this because otherwise the central system won't know which user is associated with that transaction. So ID tag is needed. Here you can see it is required, and then we have meter start. Meter start is very important because this is the way to tell the central system what was the start of the meter when we started. Our simulator started with 0, and this is basically a value of watt hours. So basically you are telling the start transaction we started with that watt hours, and when you stop the transaction you will also have a meter stop. That means you can compare the meter start and meter stop, and then you can calculate how much watt hours has been used basically. So and then you have reservation ID. This is optional because your system might implement reservation system. So if you have a user that can reserve a slot for that charging, you can send as a reservation, and that basically whenever he will come to the charging station, start transaction, that reservation ID will be used. In our case, we are not using this, and this is optional, so you don't have to provide that. And then timestamp, as always, this is important because this will tell you when the transaction is started. So if you want to have any analytics on your central system, then you will need to know when the transaction started and what was the value of watt hours, whatever that started. So basically start transaction request, this is something that we send it here. So we have that ID tag, then we have connector ID, meter start 0, timestamp, current timestamp. So this is what has been set. In response, we have start transaction confirmation. So basically what's happening there is our central system receive a start transaction. That means our charging station sent, we are starting transaction, all that information here, and the central system is coming back with a few things. ID tag info, which is required, and also transaction ID. So basically the transaction ID is created on the central system. So what you're doing here is you are sending that information, and what you are getting back is a unique transaction ID that was generated. So every transaction ID will be unique in the system, in the central system. So ID tag info, basically it contains information about authorization, a status expired, or a parent ID. So if I go click on this one, you can see here you have expiry date, parent ID tag, which is ID token, and then status. So if we go back to our simulation, we can see here ID tag info, I have that status accepted. So that means my central system received that start transaction, gave me back my transaction ID. This is unique transaction ID generated on the central system. It was returned back to me. So the charge point at this point know what is the transaction ID. So whenever I want to finish that transaction, I can use that transaction ID as a reference to send it back to the charging station. So this transaction ID is unique, generated on the central system and returned back to me. ID tag info is basically, as we saw it in the documentation, extra info, and in our case we just returned it from the central system. We got it back, status accepted. That means we sent the start transaction, system received it, ID tag has been validated, and all the data is correct, so we got status accepted. That means transaction just started with that timestamp, with that value. So that's it about the start transaction. It is a way to tell that charging station initiated transaction, and central system will need to know that at this point we started the transaction for a new user. I hope this video helps you to understand what the start transaction method is, and if you have any questions, please leave them in a comment. Thank you, and see you in the next one.